Welcome, everyone. We're gonna get going. Good morning, Shireen. Good morning, Seth. Good morning, Vanessa. I think we're going to get the show on the road. I know people are going to be streaming in, but let's get started. We'll get the housekeeping out of the way, and then we are going to be all about Shed. So welcome, everyone. I want to just start by acknowledging that we are, and I'm in Toronto, coming to you from beautiful downtown Toronto, and I just want to acknowledge that this is the original ancestral territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto, as we know, is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. One of the things that we've done at the Roundtable in our efforts towards truth and reconciliation, which I think a lot of you in the companies that you work with are working towards as well, is we started a couple of years ago a bursary program and scholarship program for Indigenous youth. We were very inspired, our team inspired, well, or maybe it was traumatized is more the word than inspired, by the discovery of the 215 children at the Kamloops, BC residential school. So we've made a commitment, and we're really thrilled that we've been joined by other independent coaches, consultants, training companies to help us with this. We've got a goal to fund 215 students. And so if you're a coach on this call and you want to get involved, please reach out to Shelby. It's really easy. You don't have to do much, but join our consortium. There's about 5 or 6 of us now, and we're growing it. And if you're one of our clients at the Roundtable or a prospective person interested in the work that we do, we're also donating, in addition to the financial commitment we've made for the next 5 years, we're donating 10% of any referral fees that we get to fund even more students. So I think we're about 22 scholarships and bursaries in. So we still have a ways to go, but we're gaining momentum. So thank you to everybody who's helped us so far. Please spread the word. This is one of the ways that we can make a big impact together. So for those of you that are maybe new to the Roundtable, let me just set the stage a little bit, because people often say, what does the Roundtable do exactly? Let me tell you where it usually starts. People call us and they say, hey, we want some leadership training, or we want some leadership coaching. For me, that's like the tip of the iceberg. And it's kind of a shallow conversation, right? We know leadership doesn't happen in a one-day workshop or in a 1-hour motivational speech. As much as motivational speakers are great, that can give us a shot in the arm. But really, when we're talking to people about what they're trying to do, they're trying to do usually one of 3 things. They're really trying to unleash exceptional leadership within their organization, or exceptional performance with their teams, or build an exceptional culture. And even that, though, we find will take you so far, because we're still sort of relying on individual performance. And so the focus for us, and what we've spent this last 16 years doing, is looking to help organizations unleash collective impact. Leadership is just too complex today. You cannot go it alone, and we've got to figure out, how do we come together to make a bigger impact as one? And so that's what we've done. So we've got a number of group, team, and even individual coaching programs that support doing that. So if you're interested, reach out to me. Happy to talk about it more and tell you what we have, available. So got through all of that, because what I really want to get to is today's conversation. And so let me stop sharing this crazy set of slides and get into it with Stephen Shedletzky, but friends call him Shed. So I'm going to call you Shed. Sound good?
I accept. Gladly accept.
And we can give permission. Everybody can call you Shed today. We are in a meeting format, right? So this is kind of casual. We like doing that at the Roundtable. Our philosophy is that we learn together, right? And I know everybody in this room has opinions about these topics. So as we go along, here's our plan for today. I sent Shed a few questions to kind of get his, mind going, but we're going to be taking breaks through our conversation for you to come in with your questions. Feel free to throw them in the chat. If you want to come off mute and ask it directly, you are welcome to. keep your camera on if you want to. I'm not going to make you, but love to see those faces and see everybody here today. So let me just tell you a little bit about Shed, and then I'll let him fill in some additional blanks if he has anything else he wants to say. But super interesting background. So went into typical corporate, did the corporate gig. And then I remember you called me when you first went out on your own. You said, hey, Glain, I kind of think it's interesting what you're doing. And can I help? And I'm at that time, I remember I was still pretty early on in my Roundtable building. And I went, I have no idea. If you have some ideas for me, let me know. But then I think Simon Sinek scooped you. And so you ended up doing 10 years really helping Simon Sinek, who is the author of the book Start With Why, build out his practice. And now you've moved out and are building out your own practice as a leadership consultant and coach, and have just released your first book, Speak Up Culture, which is what we're going to really sort of focus in and talk on today. But it's great to, be able to do this with you. And I also love seeing where you've come to through the course of your career. So anything else you want to kind of add to the crowd to round out the picture of who Shed is?
Thank you, Glain. Yeah, I mean, it's fun because I feel like we've sort of been circling the same airport, and then we've landed recently and like, hey, like, how's it going? So it's great sort of 10, 15 years later to come full circle and have this conversation. Yes, everything you said is true. Guilty as charged. And yeah, I mean, working with a prolific author for so many years and sharing his work and his message, I would often be asked, when will you write a book of your own? And my response was always, if and when I ever come across something worth writing about, because we've all, have been handed or have purchased a book at the back of a room because a keynote speaker needs to sell something. That's the definition of a crappy book. And I never wanted to write one of those. And so, this book that I wrote is semi-autobiographical, and I felt called to, and I felt that there was something unique both in voice and content here. So yeah. Yeah,
well, and I think timeliness, right? For this book, like what was it about this particular time that made you decide to write it?
I mean, one of my favorite recent quotes is from a Danish theologian, Kierkegaard, who says, life makes sense looking backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So we can never, we can make guesses about the future, but it always makes a lot more sense looking back than it is looking forward. And so, we are in a moment in history, both post-COVID and what the pandemic did to shake up the relationship or accelerate or intensify the shaking up of the relationship between employee and employer. I think things were already moving in certain directions, but the pandemic, I think, accelerated certain dynamics and things. And then just what's going on in society, that we live in a highly polar, divisive, your truth is according to your algorithm time, which is dangerous. And I think can cause a lot of disconnection, whether at work or beyond in society. And so in writing this book, which is really around making it safe and worth it for people to speak up and have healthy discourse, the book came out October 3rd, 4 days later, October 7th happened. And this conversation is relevant to how can, one of my favorite quotes in the book, it's one of mine, so it's one of my favorites, is when the ego, okay. When the human in me sees the human in you, we make progress. And so, I mean, I grew up with a stutter, so I know what it feels like to be voiceless, married a speech therapist, good choice for business, or just good choice. And for my kids and nieces and nephews. And then in my 15+ year career, I've been on teams where there is a speak up culture, and it's marvelous. The depth and breadth, not just of a professional relationship, but personal relationship. And I'm such a big believer that relationship is the foundation of what we can accomplish. And then I've also been on teams or seen teams transform from you speak up and all of a sudden you're the problem. And gaslighting is aplenty, and toxic positivity is around every corner. And not just how that's bad for business, it's bad for people and their health. I've felt that. So that was sort of the the concoction or the mix that drove me to write this book. And then none of us could have predicted what would happen once the book is out. But I think the book is relevant to what's going on right now in the world.
Yeah, so true. And I think we'll circle back on that one, because I think there's a lot of people right now that are struggling with how to speak up when these sorts of things emerge in the world. So let's kind of come back to that, because I've been hearing that a lot from clients. Sort of the similar thing happened after George Floyd. I think there was a lot of like hesitation. What do we do? What do we say? So let's circle back on that for sure. But talk to us as a start, just to set the stage. How do you define a speak up culture? And, as leaders, we've got a lot of leaders here on the, I was going to say podium platform, I guess. What can we do to encourage a speak up culture?
Well, funny you should mention I have a few slides for that.
Of course you did.
I never saw this question coming, Glenn. Geez. So I just think a visual aid helps here. So when I first started writing this book, I fully thought that I was rebranding psychological safety. I'm a fan. That's sort of the gateway that got me really interested into this work. Came across Amy Edmondson's work through work. Adam Grant. And Amy is wonderful. Not only is her work fantastic, she as a human being is wonderful, and she endorsed the book. Thank you, Amy. But Amy even herself admits that the term psychological safety is not the best term. The reason she picked it is because she wrote a paper early in her career, and one of the paper reviewers said, "Oh, you're talking about psychological safety." And she went, "If it gets me published, sure, let's go with that." Right. And so I think we have this term that is highly academic, and it doesn't really describe what it is. The way Edmondson defines psychological safety is an environment in which it is safe to take interpersonal risk. It's like, wonderful. Now, I leaned into good old Zig Ziglar, people don't buy drills, they buy holes. And so if psychological safety is the drill, what you get as a result is a speak up culture. I want to market the result, like the thing that we can get that's useful. But as I dived into the phenomenon, both my own experience, interviewing others, doing further research on it, and I'll come back to this, but Kim Scott taught me every book needs a 2x2 framework. So here's mine. But there's two phenomenon happening. Is it psychologically safe? Absolutely. And is it worth it? Because sometimes it can be psychologically safe, but you keep going back to a well that's dry. And you're like, I keep speaking up. I keep putting myself out there. I keep taking this interpersonal risk and nothing is changing. This could be responding to an engagement survey where nothing frickin' happens. This could be going to a friend and saying you should probably stop having 5 alcoholic beverages every single night. Research says 3 a week, but nothing changes. You still feel safe in that relationship, potentially, hopefully. But either due to bureaucracy, red tape, systemic issues, or a change in habit that's simply too hard, it's safe but not worth it. Yeah. We don't want this one where it's neither safe nor worth it. That's an unhappy marriage between fear and apathy, and I've been there. And that's where we get great resignation, quiet quitting, or loud quitting. Yeah. We obviously want this. It's both safe and worth it. But this one is really interesting, where it isn't safe, but it's worth it. This is folks like Ed Pearson at Boeing who took personal risks to speak up and say, this ain't a safe plane. This is Kimberly Young McClear in the U.S. Coast Guard as an openly gay Black woman with a PhD who said, I'm being harassed. And then everyone flocked to her saying, me too, right? And if people take risk to speak up here, because speaking up is never without fear. That's why I harp against the term fearless leader. Really? No. Like, that's not the goal. That is not the goal. Fear is biological and important. If you truly come across a fearless leader, they're dangerous. Yeah. But if you speak up here and it doesn't go well, it can lead to whistleblowing. So that's the dynamic. And then the sort of definition is safe and worth it to speak up with ideas, feedback, opinions, concerns, disagreements, mistakes, whether public or in a small forum, one-on-one. Speaking up isn't an instruction, it's a culture. And it doesn't need to be on social media or in the large town hall. It can be one-on-one. I love that too, because I think that is one of the things that people I think often get stuck on is, like, when we say speak up, it sounds loud, it sounds megaphone like.
So talk to us a little bit more, maybe the different ways speak up can transpire in an organization. Give us a couple of flavors of what speaking up looks like.
Yes. So, and on the cover of the book, we purposely did that, and folks go, oh, it's a megaphone, and I actually intended it as a mouth that we either speak or it closes.
Yeah.
But the good old cliche, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason, that part of a speak up culture is a listening culture and a culture of curiosity. So the two sort of pillars of how to create a speak up culture is it's a virtuous cycle between encourage and reward. Those are the two pillars and actions of what leaders do. So encourage is Ben Berman, who's a fantastic senior, great safety record pilot, that every time before he flies, he says, I've never flown a perfect flight and today is no exception. I need to know what you see. That's encourage. Encourage is silence, asking an open-ended question, valuing people's voice, using different tools like, hey team, I'm working on saying more with less words. Can you give me feedback on a scale of 0 to 10 on how concise and powerful my message was today? And if you all say 10, I think you're lying. I want the 3s and the 6s and the 7s. Like, give me feedback. I want to grow, right? Set that stage. Then once folks do speak up, is it rewarded? And reward doesn't mean bonus, pay raise, job promotion, or a statue erected next to Michael Bublé at the Eaton Center, though that would be pretty cool. A reward is far more intrinsic. Thank you. That must have taken courage to share. We didn't implement your idea, but here's why. Keep it coming. Those are forms of reward, and we must work especially hard to reward when folks speak up with bad news or say things that are triggering or unpopular, right? And it is still a mature leader who will go, "Ooh, that stings. Give me a moment. Need to scream into a pillow. Okay, now let's talk about this truth," rather than pretend that it doesn't exist and attempt to use our group thinking to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something for me that's very pivotal to leadership. And I think you and I have a very shared sort of philosophy around leadership being very much an inside out job. I always feel like the best thing you can do for your team is actually work on yourself. And boy, is it hard work, right? This is not
never
easy.
ending.
It's never ending. You know, like in our programs, we have people coming in working on a behavior and a mindset shift. And I always find, like, the really tricky thing about trying to do those things is that it's usually attached to your strength. So whatever has made you successful, there is a dark shadow that sits right under that strength that in the bad situations comes out. And I think about a lot of the successful leaders that we work with. One of the reasons they've been successful is that they've got a track record of success. They've been winners. They win. And you know what? Feedback sometimes feels like losing. So you can be as open to say, hey, yeah, give me the 6s. But, oh gosh, I didn't really actually want to hear the 6. My ego is sitting there, right? So I'm curious from, in the work that you've done and sort of as you've been thinking and doing deep dives in this book, I know you did a lot of research around this book. Curious, like, what can we do as leaders from your perspective to really move beyond this ego? Because this is all ego stuff. Yeah. So how can we start to take that little voice on our shoulder and push it away?
So I wrote a trifecta of chapters, which is like, 3 Beatles songs put together on like Abbey Road or something. And they're different chapters, but it's a journey. And the 3 chapters are define leadership, select better leaders, and then help leaders lead. So we need a better sound definition of what leadership means in society as well as our organization. Leadership is not being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in our span of care. And so I think and I don't define leadership by title, I define leadership by behavior. And so often how leadership works is, you're totally right, Glenn. It's who's the most responsible, who's the most high performing oftentimes who's the most extroverted or charismatic. And there is no link between charisma and leadership, none whatsoever. In fact, sometimes I think there's a negative correlation between charisma and leadership because it's about you, not about service. And so there's a set of behaviors that I think leaders display. Leaders show up with courage. Leaders show up with humility. There's empathy and compassion. There's authenticity, which just means you are who you are. So if you're not naturally warm or charismatic, don't try to fake it. Be cold and grumpy if that is your natural state, but you must care for human beings. That is a leadership requisite. A service orientation, the fact that we have the term servant leadership to me means that our definition of leadership is broken. Leaders serve, right? And then decisiveness, accountability, this is sort of the super concoction of, I think, how leaders behave. Now we have a definition and selection issue. Because if we're promoting folks because they're high performers, regardless of their ability to build trust and build those around them up, you're just selecting high performers into leadership jobs, and they're not displaying the behaviors to lead. They're displaying the behaviors to win. And winning and leading are very different. Winning is finite, leading is infinite, right? And so leaders need to understand the job that they're in and the job they're saying yes to, which is not around catching more fish. It's teaching other people how to catch fish in their own right, which will be different than the way that you've caught fish, right? I had a mentor of mine once say to me, you could be the next me, which then I realized you're no longer my mentor, because the goal of mentorship and leadership is to help people become the best possible them that they become. It's not mitosis, right?
Yeah.
And then we need to actually help leaders lead. I mean, one of the awful statistics that I came across in doing research for this book is that the average age of when someone gets their first formal management role, meaning that they have folks on their team that they're responsible for, and we know that that relationship has a huge impact on our health and well-being, greater than our relationship with our family doctor or therapist, and at par of our relationship with our life partner. Leadership, whether or not you're in a life or death industry, is life feeding or life depleting. Yep. But the average age someone gets their first management job, 29. The average age of their first formal management or leadership training, 39. There's a 10-year gap between we're like, hey, go do this thing and make bad habits, good luck, and we'll see you in 10 years. And then we'll try to fix all that bad stuff that you've learned and done, pardon me. And though, business is not a family, unless it's a family business. Business is more, or an organization is more of a team or a community. I don't think there's a better analogy to leadership than effective parenting, which is when you're an effective parent, you want to see that this human being blossoms into being the best version that they can be, not, become a Major League Baseball player because I never could. It's like, what do they want? How can I support them? Which also means I don't wrap them in bubble paper. I let them scrape their knee. I let them have social issues at school rather than protecting them and calling someone's parent. But I think there's no better analogy. A friend of mine, Bob Chapman, who's a great leader, said that everything he learned about leadership was wrong and everything he learned about parenting is leadership. So
that's interesting. I mean, I use that analogy, parenting and leadership, a lot as well. And I think a lot of people don't like it when I say that, but I do feel like there is so much, I agree so much with what you say. And then the other side of me, my other, contrarian brain is, as we balance both people and results as leaders, we got to balance both people and results, people and results, people and results. Sometimes leaders, we have hard jobs to do, and we do have to make hard decisions, and they're not always in the best interest of the individual. They're not.
Yeah.
Right. And we can do it in a compassionate way, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's just going to suck. And that's the hard, for me personally, that's the hardest thing about being a leader.
Well, but this is why business or organizations aren't a family. And I don't think we should parent those on our team. But when we think of how a great parent shows up in support of the growth and to strive to do what's in the best interest, but yeah, it's very hard to lay off your own child.
Yeah, like you're not going to kick your kid. Well, I don't know, maybe some people do kick their kids out of their family, but let's assume we're all functional here, not dysfunctional. Like there's, I think I think there's aspects, right? Like, so what we're talking about are the aspects that you have, from parenting that we're trying to bring into, as we think about our people on our team. So talk to me a bit. So I would say my earlier career, and folks that are in the room, start thinking about the questions you have. Let's put Shed on the hot seat. I like that.
Yes.
In these sorts of sessions, but when I was younger in my career,
and happy to be challenged. Happy to be challenged. Yes, please.
I know you're good on your feet.
Yeah. Otherwise I wouldn't be living what I preach. Yeah. Yeah. Speak up, and not me, please. Yeah. No, carry on, Glenn. Sorry.
Opportunity for all of us to speak up today. So when I was younger in my career, and I think about the brand I had in the organizations I worked for, I mean, I was known as the person who would call out the BS in the room. And I didn't always do it in a very professional manner. I would be that person in a meeting that would say, that's a really dumb idea. And this was when I was, fairly junior. I had more senior people in the room than me. And I got a bit of a reputation, early stages, being a bit of a loose cannon, right? Like it was almost like emotional immaturity is how I would describe it, right? And you learn and you grow and you sort of learn how to put a bit more restraint on keep the inside voice as an inside voice and not put it as an outside voice in certain situations. So talk to me a bit about that. Like, when would you say, even if it is high trust and the impact's high, you'd say, you know what? There's also a time and a place. When is speaking up potentially not the right thing to do, even though I'm in that upper quadrant? Is there a time, right? I guess that's my question.
So, I love that. So again, speak up is not an instruction. Speak up is a culture. And so part of a speak up culture is one in which you aren't the only one who's contrarian or speaks up. You actually create this culture where you're encouraging others to as well. Right. When all else fails in management theory, look to a comedian. So Craig Ferguson, who's a Scottish comedian, has this model that was originally intended for a stand-up bit and was used for a stand-up bit, more to speak about his 2 failed marriages and his current marriage. But I think this is brilliant. So does this need to be said? Which is subjective. So sometimes you can be like, I don't know if this needs to be said, but my instinct says yes, team, stop me if this isn't the right time or place or whatever it might be. Does it need to be said by you? And does it need to be said now? And if the answer to all 3 is yes, and it's like, all right, say it. And there's still tact, and there's still a, hey, I would request that we pause because I have a different point of view that may not be popular, but I actually think it will help us in this conversation. Can I call BS on your idea, please? Right. And that's just inoculating. That's just setting the condition such that, anytime I'm about to say something that I think could be contentious or challenging, I kind of buffer it, and that's not for everyone. That's my style. But I think that's one strategy of like, this might be unpopular, but I think it can help us.
Yeah.
And so long as you're speaking up to serve the team inside of a team where there's a speak up culture and lower politics and lower ego, that should be fine.
Yeah.
The really interesting one here is this needs to be said right now and not by me. Ooh, that's juicy. And so let's say we're in a meeting and, Glenn, you've done work on something and either you didn't feel that you had permission or you were thinking of that ugly sweater you wanted to get this afternoon or whatever. I can say, hey, I'm going to take a risk and pause us because I know Glenn's done some work on this. In fact, she has an appendix in slide 17 that's going to speak to this point and help change our decision. Inside of a speak up culture, that's like, okay, is it bold? Is it a risk? Absolutely. But this is a really great Venn diagram that guides whether to speak up or not. Here's another thing, and this didn't make it into the book. So don't bother getting the book. I'll just tell you all the good stuff that didn't make it into it. I've realized that there's a sweet spot when it comes to speaking up. Again, speak up is a culture, not an instruction. But sometimes when folks are like, ooh, boss rewards a speak up culture, I'm going to speak up all the time. That's not speaking up. That's sucking up and hogging air. And so there's coaching on, I'm glad you feel comfortable using your voice, but you actually need to limit it because you're hogging, you're not serving, and you should focus some of your attention on raising the voice of others on this team, as opposed to always being the voice, right? And then the other side, and perhaps this is where you may have been earlier in your career, is it's not a hall pass to be a jerk. Even if you have value to add, there's still tact, decency, respect, emotional intelligence, situational awareness. But oftentimes I find that these folks, the intent is actually quite positive, but there can be feedback or coaching on the behavior and the impact. Right time, who was in the room, how was it delivered? And so again, encourage it and reward. We still ought to reward truth or intent to serve, but we can still coach around behavior and impact of how someone showed up.
Very true. And I think about, and I love this idea, and you know, in our work, we talk a lot about spectrums of behavior, like the continuum of behavior. And so I love when you gave your example and you said, now this is my style. And I think that's what we see, right? And so if your style on one end of the spectrum is to be maybe a little bit more collaborative and softer and that type of thing, there might be opportunities where you do need to be a bit more direct and more forceful. And on my end of the spectrum, where I'm like, you know what, I don't have time for this, let's go, the driver type personality, that's where the slowing down, considering somebody else's point of view and coming in. So we also all, as I think leaders, have to assess, where do I tend to lean? And I always feel like this way in my marriage, because my husband and I are very polar on certain things. And I always feel like it's not that I'm right and he's wrong or vice versa, but it's probably somewhere in the middle is actually where we need to be. So I love that sort of kind of visual that you've created there, and this idea of really knowing ourselves and where our tendencies tend to lean can really be helpful.
And just one more, I see we have Wayne's hand up, which is great. But but one thing just to add there is also the dynamics of gender, race, like there are other things on this spectrum of, like, it may be very fine for me that when I show meekness, it's actually strength.
Yes.
But for others, if they show meekness, and I'm not sure if this is, that could actually not work
100%.
Based on their identity. And so I think it's also really important for us to acknowledge, again, what works for me may not work for you, and we need to find strategies that make it safe and worth it for you to speak up.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that is where, most of us work in a North American based culture with those sort of norms, and we have to challenge those as leaders, when we don't see a behavior that aligns with how we think, you should speak up or bring your opinion forward or that type of thing, because there's huge factors at play. Everything you said. Perfect. Okay. Wayne, I see your hands up. We've got a couple of questions coming into the chat too, so we'll get to those. But Wayne, what do you want to ask? Oh,
we're having some trouble hearing you, Wayne.
Oh, and Wayne disappeared. Okay, so I'm going to go to the question in the chat. One of the ones that came in is, this is a juicy one. So what does speak up turn into? When does speak up turn into not supporting your leader's decision and looking like insubordination? And how can you, if you've got a leader that maybe isn't as open to getting the feedback, right? Isn't going to say on a scale of 1 to 10 and don't give me a 10. How can you demonstrate that, hey, I'm pushing back, but it's not insubordination or lack of support? Any advice for that?
Oh, that's really interesting. Thanks, Shireen. So this is where essentially you have a different, and let me know, Shireen, and feel free to come off mute or use chat.
This isn't actually Shireen's question, just so you know. It's another question that got directed to me, and so
great.
I'm just kind of throw it out there. If the
person thank you. So let me pair it back what I'm hearing. So essentially what I'm hearing is you have a differing opinion and a differing point of view than someone more senior to you, which means attempts to say your piece, attempts to provide feedback. But if it's met with a no, you have a choice. And it's either like, all right, well, I'll give it my best and let's see how this plays out. Hopefully you don't sabotage it. Or you go, I can't stand for this and I'm not doing it. And now is there an ethical concern? If there's an ethical concern, interesting. If it's simply a differing of opinion and strategy, well, either go with it or not. Start or Jerry Maguire it and start your own thing. A friend of mine who's retired U.S. Air Force showed up to, I believe it was Afghanistan. He had just arrived, and his first mission that he was handed was not a good mission. He looked at it and he flew helicopters. So there were 4 helicopters, and he looked at the intel, he looked at the asset, and he's like, the first 2 helicopters might come home, but the last 2, I don't think so. And so one of his wingmen said to him, are we going to fly this mission? To which he said, of course we are. This is what we signed up to do. Now that's what it's called to be a good soldier, but you don't need to be a good soldier. That's a choice. So fortunately, cooler heads prevailed and that mission was called off because it wasn't worth it. But he was willing to do it because that's what he, quote, signed up to do. So when you sign up to be on a team, there's a leader of that team. Hopefully the leader of that team makes it safe and worth it for you to speak up and share a point of view, but they ultimately have the choice and, ought to sleep in the bed that they make. And you can either say, all right, I'll give it my best whirl, or you can choose and say, I'd like to join a different team or join a different organization. So try, but in the end, either give it your best whirl or you have choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because that question is very similar to the question from Shireen, which was around how do you shift a toxic culture of fear and blame? And, that can come from, that can be a whole culture in a company where there's fear and blame, and we don't actually want you to speak up. So what if you're an individual in that, or if it's, the culture everywhere else is pretty good, but I've got the manager who's really not receptive to any pushback I'm giving. So and is there anything else that you would add around this idea of, here I am in a culture where people are thriving on silence? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think many people thrive on silence. They might get by on silence. But yeah, I mean, we can only influence that which is within our control. So, I mean, I'm often asked, Shed, can you identify a company that's a wonderful speak up culture? And my answer is always no, because cultures change. Microsoft under Bill Gates was different than Microsoft under Steve Ballmer, and it's different than Microsoft under Satya. I like what I'm seeing from Satya right now, but does it mean that every single team, department, and leader at Microsoft is a speak up culture type of leader? Absolutely not. So, the only thing we can control is how we show up ourselves and how we behave. And so, if you've come across a culture or a leader or a set of leaders that are more toxic, you can see if you can build sufficient relationship and provide some feedback up, see if you can encourage that they get a 360 done. No number of books randomly sent to a CEO's office is suddenly going to transform a culture. Books make great coasters. We read book covers, not necessarily books. So transformation leadership is an inside out job. So you always have the choice to choose which relationships you wish to cultivate and feed. And you can tolerate a boss, but try to feed the relationships that do feel healthy. And the likelihood that you'll all be in the same job in 5 years is very low. So focus on what you can control, feed and nurture those relationships. And absent of being able to change the head of the dog, the tail can still wag the dog. And you can strive to contribute to the relationships that you want. And then who knows, someone gets a promotion or you get a promotion, or you move companies or they move companies. And all of a sudden, there have been moments in my career where I've been on amazing teams and they just don't last forever. Stuff happens. People move. People have children. People get promoted. Like, stuff happens and teams disband. But you can always maintain those relationships, because where you have those strong relationships, chances are there's shared values that can make a really strong team.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, Wayne, looks like you're back. Let's try again.
Thanks. I switched headsets, so can you hear me now?
Beautiful. We
Loud
can
and
hear you.
clear.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Thank you. Great discussion. The question I want to ask was in a culture where there's not necessarily fear of speaking up, but let's call a nice corporate culture where everyone wants to get along, and God forbid they say that's a stupid idea. Do you have any thoughts there? Because sometimes, you know, groupthink can take over, and people might be thinking, "Oh my God, that's a stupid idea," and they don't either say it that way or they say it in a nice way. Then that input is not heard.
Yeah.
Any
Oh,
thoughts there?
Great
bless your
question.
heart. Bless your heart is
Oh,
something that
bless
we
your
often
heart.
say in those cultures, which is a passive way of saying you bleep an idiot.
Yeah.
So brilliant question, Wayne. And you discern between a culture of nice versus a culture of kind. I hope we didn't lose
No, I
Wayne.
think we
Okay,
still
good.
there.
Okay, good.
No, I'm still here. Yep.
Yeah, great. So you're distinguishing between a culture of nice versus a culture of kind. A culture of nice is passive. A culture of kind, and I'll take from Kim Scott's work, who I reference in the book, where we care personally and challenge directly. If we just care personally but don't challenge directly, that's nice. But challenging directly and caring personally is candor with care. Or Kim Scott calls it radical candor, but I think that can cause people to show up like jerks. Again, people read book covers, not books. So I call it candor with care. The thing, Wayne, is we don't need to say your idea is stupid. We could lean into curiosity, and we can say, hey, can you tell me more the assumptions and the work that you've done to get us to this conclusion? Because I'm just not seeing it yet. I'm not trying to challenge or be difficult. I'm just trying to be aligned and with you, and I'm not yet. So like, share more. You know, my favorite tool for feedback is FBI, feeling behavior impact. It's also just fun to say FBI. But you know, so often when the word feedback is uttered in our cultures, you know, we play the Jaws score on our pianos because it's like, ooh, feedback, who's in trouble and who's getting fired. No, feedback is a tool in a vehicle used, when used appropriately, to make relationships closer and to create growth. And feedback is, especially when you're more senior, feedback is never fact, though it should be based on factual events. It isn't fact, it's opinion, and it is intended to open dialogue. You know, like example, this, I'm totally making this up. Glein, I felt confused and let down by your presentation last week because I didn't know where you got that research. And the impact is I'm not really trusting the work behind it. Can you share more of the inputs that went into that? That's not an attack. That's let me help you. You know, let's be on the same team. So yeah, I think we need to lean into more truth and challenging with care. Because if we just challenge and don't care, then that's a-hole territory.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
I think the other, I would sort of also add to this, Wayne, because it's fresh in my mind because I just worked with a team on this. So I had an HR team that I was working with around their purpose and working agreements, and you know, we did, you know, some team assessment work. But one of the things that came out was that they're a HR team. They're a very nice group of people. And one of the muscles that collectively, I think to your point about group think, right? Like when we start getting into group think, what I've noticed in the work that we do is when you bring teams together and you actually start educating the team on the team dynamics, and you start to create shared accountability to change this, as opposed to like when we can all get in the room, we can all know, yeah, you know what, we're leaning kind of heavily towards the nice. We're leaning a little bit too far that way. And then together as a group, start to construct whether it's a, hey, how are we going to surface conflict in this team that in a way that feels safe? How can we co-create phrases and conversations and things that will allow us to build this muscle? Because I see it, it's just a muscle that needs to be built, right? It's a behavioral muscle that needs to be built within a group of people. But then you shift it away from just individuals trying to own that responsibility within the team to that, hey, we all see we've got this opportunity. How can we all do it together? So that's another thing I would layer onto what Shed's saying, because I think it all, you know, there's all of those points are valid. But I think this is where as well, we need to start thinking, hey, I don't need to go this alone. If I'm in a group of people, how can we start to move the needle collectively a little bit, right?
And that's
Um,
brilliant, Glenn, because it creates a team collective and
mhm.
an objective. It's like, hey, it's like,
Yeah,
you know, I'm picturing Mel Brooks with we have these 15, no, 10 commandments, but you have like team
yeah,
guidelines that you know what it looks like in behavior in practice. And so I'm not scrutinizing you, I'm looking at your behavior against our team norms and what we
yeah.
agreed upon.
And we
I've
all
even,
said it. Yeah.
yeah.
Like I think that's the big part of it is, right? When I think we have such a hierarchical view of leadership because it's been based on the post-industrial military model, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the challenge for any of us that have grown up, earned through the ranks. I mean, I've been leading teams since I was 24 years old. So for me, you've had that model, that veteran boomer model, and it's honestly, it's a mindset shift that's very tough to sort of chip away at. But there are alternative ways, and there are other ways. I always say I'm a lazy leader. I like to make it easy on myself by sharing the responsibility collectively within the group. So
Yeah.
Shireen popped a question. She said, has Shed written a book on Speak Up? Yes, he has. Speak Up Culture, and we're going to have all the details on how to get it. So you can get his book. It's fantastic. I got to have a chance to kind of preview and take a look at it myself, but he's also got great tools. So lots of really great things, and we'll have a little get your phones ready because there's a little QR code that you'll be able to sort of snap a photo of and get some more details and information. All right.
I'll also add, Shireen, there's other books on the topic which are great. Check out Amy Edmondson's work. She wrote a book called The Fearless Organization. And she thought she italicized fearless because it's not actually, that's not the goal, but she didn't, but we had that conversation. Also, there's a great book called The Psychological Safety Playbook by my friends Minette Norman and Caroline Helbig that I would highly recommend as well. So a few others. And the other thing, Glenn, I wanted to mention, I've seen some teams use AI tools to evaluate tone of voice and empathy and compassion. So I'm working with a large consulting firm that is using some AI tools in training so that like we could run this AI and then the AI could give us feedback on how, what was the percentage time that I spoke versus you spoke if we're co-facilitating, was what did the AI think about my tone of voice, which is like, it's a lot easier to provide critical feedback when the AI is like, hey, Shed, at minute 36 and 45 seconds, like your response, you spoke over and you weren't empathetic, and we can rewatch it and we're like, yep, or like, nah, I think the AI is lying. Unless someone's like, nope, AI is not lying. But it actually lowers the bar for us potentially to have a hard conversation if it isn't one of us calling it out, but it's the AI calling it out.
Okay, I love that, but I'm also incredibly afraid of that because tone of voice has been my lifelong thing to have to work on and deal with. And, I used to blame my father for it, but now that I'm over 35, I feel like I really have to kick that excuse to the curb. So I might have to look into that. That might be a breakthrough I need. Okay, any other questions, folks? We're down to the last 5 minutes, so throw them in the chat or throw your hand up, and this is our chance. We have the expert sitting in the room with us, so anything that you're pondering at this point, now's our time.
I'm a student as more than I am an expert, but thank you.
I know everybody balks against the expert word, but you've done a lot more research on this topic than the rest of us probably have.
Fair.
But I'm kind of curious as everybody's started doing their, David, are you putting a hand up there?
Yeah, I was slipping it up and then I put
perfect.
down
Yeah.
and you caught me.
You just moved your
It's
shoulder
like
a little bit
bid
too
on
much.
something at an auction, right? And it's like, I didn't mean to bid on that. Anyway.
Yeah. So I'm about to work with an organization, and we're going to really sort of lay the foundation for the future built on this concept of psychological safety. This is a very nervous organization. And I mean nervous about all kinds of things. So I'm just wondering, have you received any pushback with the concept of psychological safety? And if so, how have you addressed that? And because I'm anticipating this extremely hierarchical culture, not being able to naturally accept something that to me seems quite normal and basic on a human level.
So, David, I'll answer this, and then I'm going to try to do a 2-for-1 and answer Sephora's great question as well, in terms of one more thing that we would want leaders to display or behave. So one, the only time I see pushback to psychological safety is when it's misdefined.
Okay.
The only time I see pushback is when it's, when it's around safe places all the time. And it's like, no. It's when I think folks determine psychological safety more as a culture of nice rather than a culture of kind. The irony is that when we truly do have psychological safety and work on it, it gives us a speed of trust. It allows us to make better decisions quicker together, where we lower politics and ego, and we heighten those who were closest to information sharing that information to authority, and authority actually embodying it, receiving it, which then dovetails in, okay, great, how can we help leaders in that very hierarchical, stodgy, old-fashioned? And it's embrace more humility, more vulnerability, more curiosity. My friend Michael Bungay Stanier always whispers in my voice, stay curious just a little bit longer. And if we could equip these leaders, like, you can actually back leaders into caring and showing more psychological safety by equipping them with tools. And one of the greatest tools is curiosity, which is really an attribute. And the skill to enable curiosity is open-ended questions. And just ask more of them than you normally would, which is, what got you to that conclusion? Please tell me more, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And more will be revealed. I'm a really big believer that, so I'll share one more little anecdote, and then we'll see how this did for you, David, and Sephora as well. So there are very few leaders in history that we can all say, like, great leader. One of them, Nelson Mandela. Like, give me the argument that says Nelson Mandela, not really effective. Pretty sure he was effective, and we need more Nelson Mandela type-esque leaders today. And he was asked in an interview how he became such a great leader. And he said he followed his father's example. His father was a community leader. He would often travel to other communities. And whenever he could, his father would insist on two things. One, meetings would be conducted in a circle, not a boardroom or a table. Because at a boardroom, there's built-in hierarchy in that table. But in a circle, though there's still hierarchical dynamics because we're human, it denotes equality. It denotes everyone's voice matters. There's no apex of a circle, and everyone can make eye contact. So do meetings in circles as often as you can. It's actually one of the fun things about Zoom when we don't pin people, is it can actually be more equal. And then the other is, whenever he could, Mandela's father would speak last. He would ask more questions, and he would only form or share his opinion once everyone else had a chance to voice theirs as well, which A, is brilliant because it literally makes you smarter. And B, everyone has a chance to feel bought in, use their voice, share their voice. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but so those are two things. So use that. Because if they want to argue that Mandela wasn't effective, I think that's an argument that they aren't going to win.
I love that. And, there's a great sort of expression that I think a lot about with, my company's called the Roundtable. We work at roundtables, is you learn in rows, you grow in circles. And I think that's the hark back to, our own classroom experience growing up, right? We learned in sitting at desks in a row, and yet growth really happens when we're all eyeballing each other, sitting in a circle together to talk things through.
Which, by the way, is so much more of what we need in society today. We aren't going to solve the world's biggest problems in the comment stream of a TikTok video or an Instagram, particularly when the majority of those comments are from bots. So we need more eye contact. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. So I can't, but this has flown by. So Shed, I'm going to give you the last word. What's one thing you want to leave this group with as they go forth into their day, into their leadership practice?
I would say two things. So one is both for you and how you show up, as well as the clients that you support. As a leader, a whisper is a shout, and your tiptoes are stomps. There's a increased weight and influence in the way that you show up and the way that you behave, and that we all have the power to make it safe and worth it for the people around us to speak up, always. And so we can always work on that practice and see what magic is created, what truth is created, and how relationships can actually grow stronger, even if we are kind and not nice.
I love that. All right, everyone. So get ready with your phones to grab the QR code here. Hopefully I've got it up. There we go.
I'm going to see if it works.
Does it? Yeah. I gotta see if it works.
I was using an old one, so I want to see if it works. Yeah.
So let's also, and so everybody knows, we'll be sending out a recap summary of some of the kind of key takeaways I had from today's conversation, links to Shed's book site, and all of the other things that you need to be able to stay in touch with him. I know he's a really active LinkedIner, so I know always welcomes LinkedIn connections, unless you've maxed out your LinkedIn connections. Have you maxed them out?
I haven't yet, so keep them coming.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. So you can get a hold of Shed that way. And then just up next for us, in terms of what's going on our end, we have got the Roundtable Alumni Peer Exchange. So this is only open to our alumni members. So we're putting your career in the spotlight. We're actually going to do kind of an end of the year. And it's been a wild year for so many of us. And so this will be a chance to kind of get together, talk about some of the trends that we've been seeing through our coaching practices, and just have kind of a really nice informal Zoom roundtable around career and career management into 2014. That's going to be on December 14th, and Colleen and I are hosting that one. And then, of course, we've got the Roundtable for Leaders program, which is our signature program. We mostly run it in-house with organizations, but if you've got an individual on your team that might be interested or looking to get a maybe external experience, we do these twice a year. Right now we're enrolling for a cohort in the spring that's at the director and VP level, so you can get a hold of Shelby if you're interested in that. And if you just want to start your own peer group, of course, I have a book too, like everybody does, on how to start a peer group, and it's called The Grassroots Leadership Revolution. So give it a grab and get yourself going. But Shed, it has been phenomenal having you on the call today. Thank you so much for the dialogue, the great advice and ideas and perspectives that you shared with the group. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Glenn. It only took us 15 years, but finally you could answer my phone call and be like, yeah, there's something we can do together. So I'm so delighted that we are here and that we did this. And thank you all for your engagement and questions. It was a joy to join you.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks everyone. And thanks for the great questions. We'll see you all. Those of you who are grads, we'll see you in December, and in February, we'll have Michael Bungay-Stainer here talking about how to work with just about anybody, his new book. So that'll be a good juicy one too. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.